It's the train.
Hang on a minute. Oh, hang on. What do I do there? Hang on. About now?
Got it. Yeah, I can see two guys standing by a car. Oh, and Anne's just joined us. What are we supposed to be looking at?
I'll show you the ones now. Who's that there, though, with the car, and where is it?
Who's that there with the car, and where is it?
Where is it taking that shot?
Hang on, is that down Sally?
No, there's a clue in the background. You know what that is?
That's you, is it?
Bob Dylan.
Oh, that's down at Larne, is it?
No, it's on the Ost Ferry.
The Ostend Ferry?
It's stuck for many reasons.
The beach before the bridge was built.
Oh, what? Where are we talking about?
Severn Bridge.
Oh, right, the ferry. Oh, right, yeah. 19. So the ferry was the bridge was opened in 1966, wasn't it?
Yeah, they just built it. You can see it in the background.
Ah, right. So that's the old ferry that you could only get like 3 cars on.
Oh, it's more than that. 15 cars or something. Sorry,
They could have made a fortune, those people. It really could. So, right, we're going to have to...
hang on, I've got to find these pictures, yeah? Hang on.
Now, go on, then, because we've got to get started in a moment. Go on.
Can you see the one here? Hang on.
Yeah, we've got the one there. Can you enlarge it yourself?
Hang on. Goes a bit fuzzy over there. 1910, that is Friars Point House.
That's Friars Point House, is it?
Yeah, the drawing room.
Oh, wow. That's brilliant. So
I'm going to put them on Facebook. Hang on. Another one in the drawing room.
Yeah.
Rockery and the house look.
Ah, right. Down below, if you want to bring it up again.
Hang on.
You got it?
Yeah.
You want to bring it up the screen?
How do you mean?
We kind of. You need to bring it up a bit further. All we're doing is seeing the car and the room.
Hang on, what's going on here? What can you see there?
We got a car and we got an old room which we mentioned as Friars Point House.
Oh, hang on, it's not coming up.
No.
Hang on.
I'm listening.
Yeah, don't worry. Richard's trying to show. Oh, right, we got the images there now. Oh, well, we did have.
I've got a great big
Now we've got some images. We've got a drawing room on the left, and we've got the gatehouse on the bottom on the left, and we've got a plan of a church, and we've got Friars Point House.
Yeah. Pretty good, isn't it?
It's all there, Richard.
Look how the gateway is completely different.
Yeah, it is different.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's very different. So how we say that the column I wrote was slightly wrong?
The wind.
Right.
Right, I'll get out.
Yeah, good.
I don't think
No,
I've got
not good.
Anyway,
Thanks for that. Right, okay, Bill. Okay, right, crack on. Bill, you took a while to get on, and Anne's only just got on anyway.
No, I haven't. I was here at 6 o'clock to 6:10, and I got pissed off, so I went somewhere else.
No. Me and Richard had seen you come on. You came on for a second, and I went to put you on. You had gone. You got on at 6:10. I went to put you on. You'd gone again.
Yeah, like I've been trying from 6 to 10 to get on, so I gave up then.
No, me and Richard have been looking for you. You haven't been on.
Yeah, I was on.
I couldn't get on. There was nothing happening.
Yeah, no, me and Richard were actually waiting for you.
No, you weren't. There was nothing happening. I'm telling you now, the screen was blank, waiting for you to actually start. And you haven't
Richard,
started.
can you tell Bill that we've been waiting?
No, can you tell
Well,
Carl that I've
I
been
was on
waiting
there.
for him as well?
I was on there, all right.
I wasn't.
But from about
Carry on. Carry on.
about a
Matt.
minute past 6. But
Right,
I was
okay.
late. You should have told me about you should tell me about these classes. Yesterday, you were advertising a Tuesday class.
Yeah, well, the Tuesday class is the one that I always do on a Tuesday.
Oh, all right.
I thought that was misleading. Mind, I was going to mention to you.
Yeah.
I was going
Right.
to get in touch in case you were doing tonight yesterday.
No, we were doing tonight yesterday. It's just that I do Tuesday evening and I also do sort of
Yes.
this.
Yes. But you said you only do one.
Yeah, we are going to be only doing one as soon as the one of the people on a Thursday evening can do a Tuesday evening.
Right. Okay, then. Nice to see you, Bill.
Hello. How are
Billy?
you, Anne? How are you?
Billy.
Did you have a nice Christmas?
Yeah, I was ill all over Christmas.
Only doing one as soon as the one of the people on a Thursday. Right. Okay. So we may as well do everybody's news. Anne, have you got any news this week?
Archaeological.
Yeah.
No.
Right. Okay. Right. Have you got any news for us this week, Bill?
Nothing very important, but over Christmas, I stood on the shore where Christopher Columbus left for America, sailed for the new Americas in 1890. That's not very exciting,
Where's
is it?
that? Portsmouth or?
It's on an island called La Gomera, southwest of Tenerife.
Mm.
So I was there.
Right.
Not very exciting, but the church there has got all the sort of paintings of how they thought it would have looked, you know, with this little fleet of, is it 3 boats, 3 ships?
Yeah, 3 ships. The Santa Maria, the
Nina and the Pinta.
That's
But,
right.
apart from that, nothing particularly exciting. No, usual things, you know. Yeah.
Well,
Okay. So what we're going to do is, as you know, some of you will be aware that we did a video before. We did a video last week, and that video last week, I'm hoping that everyone watched it. If they didn't, it went down very well, and it's basically set the scene for what we'll be doing on Tuesdays at 7:30 and Wednesdays at 5 or 10 past 7. And obviously part of that, what we'll be doing on Tuesdays and the Wednesdays will be placed into following the line. And a response to last week is how the perception of history and archaeology has actually been seen throughout its reconstruction phases. So what we're going to do, we're going to be doing this today for just half an hour. Then we're going to be running into the next class, which everything's sort of linked and sort of intertwined now. So that's good. So one of the things I will say is that the lecture that we did last week, which went online, it was looking at how archaeological sites in the Neolithic have been reconstructed by antiquarians and archaeologists, and how that sort of makes the perception of archaeology slightly different from the archaeology that was there before it was reconstructed. So just talking at that, most of you have actually been to Wayland Smithy, and I think one of you has been to Wayland Smithy with me, which is near Uffington. And when you look at Wayland Smithy, it's a load of stones, there's remains of chambers and so on and so on. That is mainly in the raw, that is mainly in the flesh, that's mainly as it was excavated and left. One thing that I didn't mention on Tuesday, and one last week, and one thing that I didn't mention yesterday, was that when archaeological sites are excavated, they inevitably change your interpretation of what the archaeology is about. And a good example good example of that is 1 minute you've got a mound covering an archaeological site, the next minute you've got the mound disappeared and you've just got a load of stones sticking out. Well, you know, that sort of perception, that sort of idea following the line, that sort of understanding is very, very difficult to try to understand what the Neolithic period was about and how the Neolithic period is truly to be perceived. And anything from the Neolithic period that we see today has undoubtedly been changed by the thousands and thousands of years that have gone by, that the Neolithic was in fact a period in our shared history, whether it's in Britain or somewhere else in the world. So what I've got is some images that then flow directly into the lecture beyond 7 o'clock, which is looking at the barrow diggers. Now, I want to give you an idea what we'll be doing over the next few weeks, if not the next few months, which is also following the line. So I'd like to mention that Bill, your money's due now for January, so that needs to be sorted out.
I need to talk to you about that.
I do believe that Richard has and sorted that out as well. So anyway, we'll have to talk about that again, because nobody likes people talking about money. So right, so we're going to crack on. So what we're doing over the next few weeks is, as I say, months really, is next week specifically, we'll be looking at the site known as Arborough, which is in the north of England. It's a site I've never come across. It's in the Peak District. It's a site known as Arborough. It's a sort of Neolithic stroke Bronze Age site. So we'll be looking at that next week, excitedly, based upon somebody who's introduced it to me, who's actually done some aerial photography, and they said, why didn't you do Arborough? So they said that before Christmas. They watched the YouTube recording and they loved what I was saying. So we'll be looking at Arborough next week. It's a site I've never come across. It's a site with a platform, with a massive ditch, with a huge bank, and then all the standing stones in the middle have been put on this, put flat. Recumbent stones, they've been put flat. It's like Stonehenge, but the Stonehenge has been demolished. So that's the site of Arborough that we'll be looking at next week, excitingly as well, interpreting that from an archaeological point of view, interpreting that from sort of a new way. It's a bit like looking at Göbekli Tepe. Let's look at Göbekli Tepe and let's just sort of try to understand what's going on. So the other thing that the week after that, we'll be looking at the misconception of Neolithic archaeological reconstructed sites. And then the following week, we'll be looking at continuing, trying to interpret, trying to understand how important the work of antiquarians was in the 15, 16, 17, 1800s, although they may have ripped and destroyed and left us very little of what they were digging. But people's interpretation of what history and archaeology is within the past is massively important, because it makes us understand the past from another point of view. I'm gonna mention somebody who Richard will know very well, a chap by the name of John Story, somebody who you might not know about unless you've read my Romans in South Wales book, or Romans in Vale Glamorgan. John Story was a chap who told us about the history and archaeology of Barry from and the Vale of Glamorgan and the Roman land base and Ely. He told us about these sites and he basically said, oh, this is what I feel is what's going on. And his ideas have then lent us to either believe what he's saying or to challenge what he's saying. But he was an archaeologist who gave us the information, and you can take the archaeology and you can also interpret that archaeology in whatever way you want. So what I want us to do now, I've got some images I want us to look at, and it takes us to Newgrange, it takes us to Tinkinswood Burial Chamber and St. Livens. And those three sites, particularly the first two, have got something massive in common, right? It's all about interpretation and how we see the past, and how our past today of looking at the past is shrouded by other people's interpretations, which in the case of Newgrange is total. And what they've done with Newgrange is, in my view, is to complete vandalism, is a complete rape and distortion of history, big time. What they've done with Tinkered Burial Chamber is something very different. So John Ward, he gets the credit for that. What they've done with Newgrange, no names to be mentioned, but you'll understand my anger when we look at it. So let's just try and hopefully, if this doesn't go wrong, and we don't end up on a load of porn sites and stuff, strange images. Hopefully, we'll get this right now, and hopefully, if we go to there and we go to images, oh, and it's worked straight away. So hopefully, oh, look at that. These are the images that we're going to be looking at. Oh, going all the way. Keep going. Oh, falling asleep. There we go. Love it. And what we do find is this is the next lecture. This is the lecture that we'll be doing after 7 o'clock. But we don't want to do that now. What we want to do is we want to stop and we want to think. Now, again, the reason why I'm using the line and looking at Newgrange is based on last week's lecture. So you need to have seen last week's lecture. If you haven't, then what I'll do is introduce it. Last week, the main lecture, because this is obviously a sub-lecture, so the main lecture that we did last week, and obviously the main lecture we'll be doing after this, and the main lecture we're doing Tuesday. One thing that I was saying is look at Stonehenge. Look at what they've done to Stonehenge, how they've distorted and altered Stonehenge, and what are we actually seeing? And then what we think about is then last week I also mentioned Maes Howe, and how the misinterpretation of Maes Howe is clear for all to see. And then we look at Avebury, and then the site that's been completely mucked around with is Maes Howe. And also I mentioned last week Barcloddiad y Garres. I think it's one of the only excursions that Bill never went on with us, which was the trip to North Wales, where we went to Barcloddiad y Garres and we went to Bryn Cachar, and we also looked at the site, the Holyhood Mountain, the Iron Age site. But I mentioned that last week as well. One thing that sort of so angers me about Newgrange is that it's very much personal. So when you go to Newgrange, it's presented for the public. It's like a pseudo Windsor Castle stroke Stonehenge stroke Disney experience. And sorry, Anne, that's how I feel. I know you love your sites in Ireland, but I'm trying to.
I must admit, I changed my opinion. It is too messed about with, you know.
So there's we can use the word discuss and disgust at the same time. So that's a really good point. I feel I'm obviously not upsetting you. Could be upsetting Bill, could be upsetting Richard. Somebody might be upset by what I'm saying. However, then I want you to say something in a moment, Anne, but I want you to say something in response to what I'm about to say. So it's like we're trying to follow the line of history. We're trying to see that history is interpreted through our eyes today, and that interpretation is correct, right? I'm sure you would agree with that statement. However, the next point is that when I did this last week, Tuesday, somebody commented on YouTube. So it was a YouTube recording. It was for you guys to watch. It wasn't live. And one person replied on YouTube. They said, actually, I agree with you, Karl, but I completely disagree with you. And they explained why they completely disagreed with me. And how they disagreed with me, they said, well, isn't it good that we're allowing these sites to be conserved and reconstructed and presented, because it allows the sites to be preserved for a very long period, and people are able to enjoy them, and people are able to sort of love them. And I said, yeah, you got a good point. But my sub response to that is Last Cow, right? What they could have done with the Last Cow and the paintings at Altamira, what they could have done, they could have gone in there, and there's something else with this. They could have gone in there and they could have allowed tourists to go in there in their thousands every single day. And by now, Lascaux, there would be nothing much on the walls because bacteria would have attacked it. People would have drawn on it. People would have urinated or got on it. They would have chucked things out. They would damage it with this and that, right? So what the French government said, they said at Lascaux, what we're going to do, we're going to allow access to Lascaux, only small numbers of people every year. But what we're going to do, we're going to build another Lascaux down the road, which has exactly the same paintings, which members of the public can go into. But the real Lascaux is preserved in its entirety, with its integrity intact, without the damage caused by members of the public. That's a really good point. So, no, that's me said, right, and respond to that and respond to why you feel that this isn't appropriate, and then we'll carry on with what we need to do.
Did you say, do I think it's inappropriate or
I want you to.
appropriate?
I want you to respond. I want you to respond to what you've said, because you said to me you've
Oh,
changed
I
your
said,
mind.
yeah, it's too pristine. It's too, you know, it does seem to detract from the, you know, well, I say sacred. It might have been to someone, you know, and I think it does detract from the essence of what it is.
So what is essence? What when we're talking about Tim Ingold and what is essence? Remember Bruegel and the Harvester. What is the essence of that painting?
Essence is like the people, really, the people that were involved with building it.
So are you saying the essence is what they saw, and what we're seeing is not what they saw? Is that what we're saying? Am I putting
Yeah,
words in your
something
mouth?
like that. Something like
Okay.
that. Yeah, yeah.
Okay. No, that's fine. So again, you know, we what are the
Yeah, I mean, the inside looks authentic. You know, quite.
hang on a minute. You've got two arguments there. So what you're saying, so what we've got, part of the site looks genuine, which you
Yeah.
can't really disagree that this is probably not really been touched because it doesn't need to be touched, but there is a little bit that has with the roofing.
Yeah.
But you are right,
Mm.
right? So, but then again, what they've done is completely alter the outside, and we'll look at two images from the outside as it once looked, 100 odd years ago, and you'll start to see that's not the same site, but it is.
No.
One
Yeah.
one thing, one of the things that one of the big arguments with archaeology, and how we see archaeology, is our perceptions of archaeology. There's two ways into that. And no, I'm not going to get any images of the pornography up from Pompeii there. But what we're saying that the hidden room, the private room of the Naples Museum, and there's a little room, and you can look at drawers and you can see all this pornography, right? Which is not on general display, right? But we've got no right to say what's right or wrong. So obviously they have their ways of saying, but what we've done, we've used our modern day standards to say what can and can't be seen. And then when we move that to Egypt, we see in Egypt, for example, people going into tombs in Egypt and cutting out the nice bits of the art, chucking it in the Smithsonian, and the Egyptians are left with what's gone, right? That's wrong, but that's sort of in essence tomb or grave robbing, right? But then when you go to ancient Egypt, one of the biggest problems what they did find, and what we're doing, we're looking into a tomb in Newgrange, but we're also thinking about the perspective of ancient Egypt. And what you do see on the plains of the Giza plateau, we've got some burial chambers, and what they're doing is they're being hit by water levels rising, right? And so the point to be made is what they've done with some of those tombs is that they've taken the frescoes off the walls, and they put backing on them, and they reattach them, so even the interpretation of them is slightly different, so that members of the public can actually go in and see them. Is that right or wrong? So, but there is something to be said that when I've been to When I've been to the Brocha Mausa, which I should be showing you an image of, but things will probably screw up if I do that. The Brocha Mausa, they changed it. Instead of having a low lintel, they raised the lintel so members of public can go in there.
Mm.
And I'm just thinking, you know, who is the past for? Is the past for the people that actually created it, or is the past for us? Because it's not for everyone. The past is not for everyone. Even the people who created it, it's not for them, it's for us. So if you brought them back from the past to now, so in other words, what we're doing, we're following Tim Ingold's line, right? One gap, or maybe he didn't make a gap because his line follows. It's like thinking, right, what we're seeing is that necessarily what they saw? And my answer is no.
No.
And that to me is distressing. I was looking, I think this is Crowborough, the Mithraeum on Hadrian's Wall. Is it Crowborough? There's a Mithraeum on Hadrian's Wall. It's Crow something. And I was watching a video today, and they basically said, "Oh, this is how the Mithraeum looked in the 300s." And I'm thinking, well, that's not what the image I looked at earlier on that showed the excavations. Oh yeah, but we had to portray it in a certain way. And I'm thinking, yeah, but who are you doing this for? Yeah, why are you portraying it in this way? I don't want to see it in the 400s. I want to see it in the 200s. I actually want to see how the site was excavated. You know,
mind you, it has to be, you know, where it is, you know, like you said about them finding places, and you know, there's flooding and things like that. I think New Grange is in a valley.
Yeah.
So it might be threatened by water, seepage.
Well, the answer simply is that you keep. Well, my answer, right? 1,000 Irish archaeologists can disagree with me, 2 could agree with me. That's fine, or it might be the other way round. Dan, right? I don't know, but the point is that if that's the case, and you build another one, and you leave the archaeology as it is for people to see, right? You know, there's for me the buzz, right? For me the buzz is I've done something that Bill's not done, right? I went to Cyprus. I went to Cyprus in 1983, and I'm hoping I'm wrong. I'm hoping I'm right with this, Bill. We're being competitive a minute, Bill, for a reason. I went to Cyprus when the archaeology in Cyprus was raw, right? When you could go in tombs and they hadn't been touched, and you could actually look down into. You could look at archaeological sites that had been slightly blown up by the Turks or the Greeks, right? You could still see Kalashnikovs on roofs that had been dumped by fleeing troops. This was in 1983. This was 8 years after the war. This is only 8 years after the war. I'm touching history. I'm licking history. I'm licking the Jake of history in 1983. So I'm seeing history as it is. And what I saw was fresh mosaics that had been excavated, fresh presentations. And now it's not the same, right? It's completely different. It's not the archaeology that I once loved, right? And again, who is history and archaeology for? The thing is, right, what I like is to see history and archaeology, right? I like to see it as it is. But what I do get disappointed with is people mucking around with history. But for example, me and Richard, when we were little children, right? And even though me and Richard are years apart, right? When me and Richard were little children, right, we used to see Barry Castle, right? With the fireplace not blocked up. You could climb up into the fireplace, and you could get into the gatehouse area, and you could look around, right? Now that's blocked up, right? The top of it is capped off. It's a completely different looking site than me and Richard used to play at when we were children, right? And I've got the same experience as Richard, except it's different. It's a different time span. Richard could argue with them, it was look different, but the actual remains look very similar in Richard's day as they did in my day, right? But now they look completely different, and we're talking about not a generational thing. We're talking about in the past few decades, everything has changed. And who are we doing history for? Right, again, following that sort of Ingold thing, following that experience. For example, I'm seeing my acting career more now. I'm accessing that, and I'm seeing the acting very similar as I always have to the archaeology. It's except with the acting, you've got an excuse to interpret the past, right? You can see the past in one way, and somebody can make another film and see the past in another way, and another film in that way, and another film in that way. Each people are critical, right? For example, the Band of Brothers film, right? Even though they say that Omaha Brick Beach, the Band of Brothers stuff, the 6th of June 1944 is accurate, except everything else isn't. The blood and the death. They actually had the anti-tank defenses on the beach in the Band of Brothers the wrong way round. They actually had the pillboxes in the wrong places, right? But they did it for Hollywood. But people are saying, but that is the best interpretation of the D-Day landing at Omaha Beach. And lots of American soldiers say this, but the rest of it isn't right? But the point I'm trying to make is that that's an interpretation. Nobody's saying that that's real.
Yeah.
Do you see where I've led you, Anne? People are saying that this is real. The boards are saying that this is real. It's not.
It's the way archaeology is managed, by people who think that they have a right to manage it. I mean, in one respect, we thought America did, fantastic things with their paleontology, and
Yes.
they've got wonderful museums, and they have tourist facilities. Everything is great, is presented very well, but how authentic is that? I mean, it's from under the ground. They came from under the ground, and they had to be put in a place where you could display them. But this is like real. It's like Newgrange is a real phenomena, and yes, it was supposed to be white. It was supposed to be.
Oh, was it?
Well, I read somewhere that somebody said, of course it would be white, but I don't know. I don't know.
Actually, Anne, right? I have said that, right? But now I know I'm wrong, right? We can say,
There's
of
no
course,
chalk there. I don't think. I don't know.
We can say, of course, it was white. Yeah, but that's one interpretation. It's like, for example, Casteth Koch, right? It's the reason is in the name, right? It says Casteth Koch, right? The Red Castle.
Red, yeah.
But does that mean to say the stone was red, or was it whitewashed with red ox blood, right?
Yeah.
You see what I'm trying to say?
Yeah.
And you could have the White Castle. There is a White Castle. There's a White Castle in Gwent.
Yeah.
Now, was that a White Castle because it was owned by somebody called White, or was it a White Castle because it was painted white with whitewash? Was it a White Castle because you could see it in certain light, and when the sun shone on it, it was actually looking white? The reason why I've actually owned that quote that you said, that somebody said it was white, because I've come in there and actually what I'm saying is that when we look at West Kennet Long Barrow, I've said that, oh, if you looked at West Kennet Long Barrow back in the past, it would be white, right? And I've argued, I've said it would be white because they would use there was chalk blocks, right, that was used to make it look white. However, there's a lot of flint there. Now, if you make it out of flint and chalk, forget the chalk. It's just the chalk discolors quickly. When this is really important, right? When we look at Silbury Hill, right, which we've already done, when you take a piece of chalk out the ground, it looks white. But when you start building with it and it gets moist, it starts to look yellow, right? So could the West Kennet Long Barrow have looked white? Because when the sun shone on it, it was the chalk that was making it was the flint that was making it look white, not the chalk. So I've misinterpreted the evidence. I've got the evidence wrong. It's the sun that's making it look white. Yeah. Do you know here where I am, it's the word when comes up a lot. Okay. So Gaia when, right? Forget the Gaia bit, right? Just think about the when, right? W-E-N, it means white. Now, for a while, right, we didn't really know where the word when came from because there was nothing. It was a green stump. That was it, right? As you dig into the ground, what we find where? Loads and loads of quartz. There's quartz everywhere.
Oh, yeah.
The ground is full of quartz. You dig into the ground, right? There's quartz everywhere. So that explains why it was called why the word white was used, because they used white quartz, right? So this is where we're going. So you made a and by the way, boys, right, Richard and Bill, if you want to say something, you're really welcome. We haven't heard from you, but one statement that you made, I think this is the Anne and Carl show. One statement that you made was, how authentic is the past? I think you said that. That's what I wrote down. I do believe you said that, but if you didn't, you were close, right? How authentic is the past? I think you meant that. If you never said it, that's what I'm saying you said, right? And that's really, that's a book title, right? How authentic is the past? And you could basically, what does that mean when you make that statement? Obviously, Tim Ingold, the Bruegel, I'm presuming what Tim Ingold not Tim Ingold painted, what Bruegel painted in the 1500s with Harvester and all those 12 or whatever paintings he made. We're presuming that that's what he saw, right? I am presuming that that's what he saw, right? Just as somebody could fake a photograph today. Oh, therefore I'm denying what Bruegel painted. I'm not. What I'm trying to say is that you could fake a painting today. You could fake a painting or a photograph or a picture today. What we do think of is everything that people say of in the past is accurate, right? We always say that what they are saying is genuine, is real. For example, the best example is the Bible, right? You could. This goes one way and another, right? You could say that the Old Testament, let's just do the Old Testament, okay? You could say that everything in the Old Testament is rubbish, but then I would argue I don't agree with that statement, because I believe that most of what's written in the Bible is real, right? And that doesn't mean to say I'm a Christian or a Jew or a Hebrew cleric. But what I'm saying is that most of what they've seen in the Bible is actually proven to be fact rather than fiction, right? So people can't say it's fictitious anymore, right? When people used to. So what we've got to do, and then for example, the Venerable Bede. Bill knows the Venerable Bede very well. Venerable Bede was somebody that everything that the Venerable Bede wrote about was real, right? But now we're finding out that what the Venerable Bede was saying in many parts and many interpretations was wrong. But what we do we talk about Nennius. We talk about this monk that was writing about the 800s. We believe everything that he said. We believe that every writer that about King Arthur's accurate. Well, lots of people who believe that King Arthur's real are very similar to Christians. I'm going to be very careful what I say now, because we actually haven't done much of the lecture at all, but this is all linked and all relevant. Everybody that reads and learns and believes about King Arthur is real, right? And then somebody could say, well, King Arthur wasn't real. You could actually say the same about the Bible. The Bible's not real, right? And then you can say, yes, it is. It's all, lots of this is about belief, right? But when we look at the archaeological point of view, because that's what my qualifications are in, right? I've got to say that actually the archaeology is what's real, right? So if you want to, they're actually believing that Sodom and Gomorrah actually existed, right? Well, that's the archaeology. So therefore, the Bible writing about Sodom and Gomorrah, that's real. The walls of Jericho coming down. Well, Kathleen Kenyon in the 1950s proved that the walls at Jericho did come down. So is what the Bible's writing about the walls of Jericho coming down accurate or not? So the point is that, but that is what happened in the past. Those things actually happened in the past. What we do now is alter the past, and that is what is wrong. You know, when you said earlier on, oh God, Richard, can you please look out for people coming on, and then what we will do is that at 5 past is coming up, because I need a little break. So what we will do is at 7:10 we will take a break. Right, but this is actually what Anne was talking about. This is an original plan. So that is there, but that is not there. What I'm trying to say is that is not on that, because this is a cross section, right? This is the passage, the 63-foot long passage. It's showing the stones in there. It's showing this like conical, this beehive above. Right, what's all this about? I don't really care what this is about. This to me is what this should look like, right? I feel happy with this, because that is that. But what we do find is that is not that. So if we zoom in on that there, we can see that there, that stone slab there, right? What you can see, right, is that solid behind there, right? There's two little entrances. You've got that in your mind, right? Got that? Good. So what we're going to do, we're going to go there. Oh, hang on. What have I done? I've just pressed the wrong button. Hang on. We're going to get this back on. Right. Okay. So there. We're going to have to go back on these images a minute. Sorry, pressed the wrong button. I nearly took a photograph.
So what you're saying is that it was just like most of the tombs that we have, it was open. It had like stones on top of the passage, rather than this big mound.
Actually, and you've taken it in another direction, and you've taken it in a meaningful direction, right? That's not the direction I was going to go in, but you've actually said something that, right, okay. What I'm going to do is my little point, then I can bring your point, and I'm going to go back to my point. So that there is meant to be that there. And you can see 1, 2, and you can see it's solid.
Yeah.
And you look there and you're thinking, well, there's a little ramp there. And there's a decorated stone there.
Yeah.
And there's this hollow there. And where's the hollow above? And you're thinking, hang on, there's something not quite right about. So if we take that image there, you can see the two uprights and the slab above, right? That is actually what you'd see below there. So what's this thing above? And actually your point is very, very important, right? We can, right, your point is 2 points. The first point about your point is that did it have this sort of whitewashy thing around the outside, right? I'm going to say, well, if there's evidence for that, it wouldn't have looked like this anyway. That's what we're going to go with, right? And the other thing as well is, did it really have a roof like this? Did it really look like this?
Mm.
And actually, something I thought of the other day, which is very, very important, right? This next point is a good point. Yeah. That there, you can see gaps between the stones, right? And if you look at this, right, these stones themselves are looking in cross section, right? But believe me, the stones above have got gaps between them, right? So if you put soil directly above that, the soil will gradually make it through back into the passage. I think that's an obvious. You don't need an engineer like Bill to work that out, right? Why do you need a mound on the top? You don't need a mound on the top. You go on.
Yeah, it looked more like it was built into the rock, rock side rather than a mound, like
Sort of. It's
it
almost
looked
as
like
what you're saying.
a cave, really. Although I'm
So
sorry.
no.
It looks,
Yeah, I do know what you're trying to say. I do know. Richard, can you look out to see if there's anyone coming on?
I can't see anyone.
Okay, good.
But
I mean,
no one's-
that would be pretty amazing, But I think, even to have left it like that, But
For me, that is pretty amazing. But what there's several stages of reconstruction.
right.
Okay, right. So the fact of the matter is, I'm gonna say it as it is, right? They haven't raised the height of this. Or have they? Because that looks more passage-like. It looks like they may have they lowered it? I don't know what is going on here, right? Because again, that looked very different than that. So again, who are we doing the past for? Who is authenticating the past? Who is interpreting the past? And when you change levels and when you change things and when you alter things, right? It changes how the past was.
It's the
In
truth.
other words,
Yeah.
what we're doing, we're using a time machine. We're using a time machine and we're changing the past, right? We're altering it, which we shouldn't, in essence, do. And the one that to me is not that to me is just not the same site. It's just like I can't do it.
No.
I-
Someone has supposed, they've made suppositions about, what that looked like, what that mound looked like, or, I mean, they have put bricks there, so I don't know if they were authentic or not.
The one thing I am going to say is that we're presuming that decorated stone has always been there.
Yeah, the decorated stone at the bottom is very,
But
very significant,
hang on. If you look at that there, you can see there's not really much there. There's nothing keeping it in the ground.
No.
So what we're saying, right? Our ancestors in the past had to jump over these stones to get down that passageway.
Yeah.
How did they get in it? Did they use a ladder? It just doesn't make sense. So where have these stones come from? Have they always been there? Were these standing stones at one point and they've just been laid like that because some farmer did that 200 years ago? Again, it's and there is another way of looking at this. This is when it's been slightly reconstructed.
Yeah.
So what they've done, they've removed this walkway on the right. But what they've done, they've made it look a little bit more presentable. But that hole, that aperture at the top, is still not there.
No.
It's still not there. It's still not in existence. So
Well, you've seen the ones on Orkney and, you know, like
Yeah,
my town, and it helps you to make sense of, you know, other tombs, and then you can compare them.
the one thing I would say is that when we go to places like Orkney, Orkney has lots of archaeology that up until about 30 to 40 years ago wasn't even touched.
Hmm.
You know, so
Mhm.
it's still in its raw when you look at it, and the interpretations are, people can't get away with screwing around with them too much, except when you look at the stones at Stennes they have. But that's another story altogether. So what we are going to do, guys, we're going to have a little break for 5 minutes.
Thank
Right, we're
you.
going to take a little break. We're going to come back with some questions, and then that'll lead us into the next bit because we haven't finished this bit of the lecture. So we're going to take a little break for 5 minutes. So if everyone sort of talks amongst themselves, I will be
I've
back.
got to
So
eat
we're
my
going.
dinner.
All right, okay. Best of luck. Share it with Bill because Bill hasn't eaten either. So
Well,
okay then. Okay,
mine's
folks. What we're
cold
going to
now.
do? You guys talk amongst yourselves, and I will be back. I've got to work out who's been bowled over. 5 minutes break.
Can you see me eating my chips, Bill?
I can see you eating. It is a chip, is it, Anne?
Oh no,
It looks like a big chip
I
if it
thought
is
I
a
was
chip.
hiding.
What, you have not dinner yet, have you?
No,
Well, you shouldn't eat and have lectures at the same time
I know.
because
I better go.
your stomach demands the blood flow, not your brain.
Well, this is why I was ill though over Christmas, because of stress.
Were you? What, cooking the turkey?
No,
Family matters, no doubt. Yeah.
meeting my son-in-law and going there for Christmas dinner and
Oh dear.
you know.
Why is it that it's such a stressful time at Christmas, isn't it? With relatives visiting and
Yeah,
food.
it's like people's expectations, and yet you don't really know what they want. You know, like modern people, they don't really expect much, really. Mari, my daughter, doesn't, and yet she does. You know,
But I
like,
think I've long passed the point of wanting anything for Christmas. In fact, I gave a
yeah,
Christmas, not take.
I didn't. Hello, Jeff. Goff.
Hi.
I Gav.
Hi.
Have a nice Christmas.
Oh, yeah.
New Year.
But yeah, thank you. Very nice. And you?
Good. Yeah. I've just been ill, that's all.
Oh, dear.
I've just had something, you know. But
Oh. Didn't
I
pick it up
got
from kissing
try.
Santa under the mistletoe, did you?
Pardon?
Didn't pick it up from kissing Santa under the mistletoe.
Oh, I don't know. I mean, I didn't kiss anyone, but
Oh, dear.
I got, you know, bad throat. I did have a bad throat. I've had a bad throat for weeks, though, and then it's sort
There's
of,
a lot of it around.
yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, I'm going to try and eat this bit of dinner.
Fine.
You're not, are you?
Yeah, I can't go away.
You better eat it then. No. Oh my God. Oh. Well, talk. Somebody say something. Did they have a nice Christmas? A bloody awful Christmas, or what?
Well, mine was very hectic. We went up to Yorkshire.
Oh, it was hectic. Yeah.
Yeah, well, it was. The driving was horrendous. You know, never again.
It's getting worse and worse, Goff, isn't it? Driving long distances, especially with bank holiday. I don't envy you. I really don't.
Yeah, I'm getting a bit too old for it, and of course, getting the lights so dark so early.
Yeah. Well, I got away from it this year and I went to the Canary Islands.
Yeah, well, I think that's the answer, isn't it?
Well, from a point of view of Christmas, it is, because they don't celebrate Christmas as such, and you've got to look for signs of Christmas. It's very calm out there at this time, but what they do celebrate is Epiphany on the 6th of January,
Yes.
the Three Kings Festival.
All right. Yeah.
That's why I like it out. There's no hype, there's no hard sell, no commercialism to any great extent. So
Yeah, it's great, but you've got to also abandon your traditions of seeing the family, which I treat kids.
don't you want to? Most people do.
Well, realistically, yes.
Yes.
But my heart says I can't if they want me to come up. What can you do? But definitely, seriously think about something like that. Yeah.
Yeah. Do your own thing.
In Spain and the Canaries and Madeira, and it was about 22 degrees. I thought, that's nice. Yeah.
It was 26 one day. Very pleasant. Very pleasant. Yeah. Yeah, it's good. Yeah, think about it.
Yeah. Oh, I will do.
It's the first time I think I've been away for Christmas as such, and it was very pleasant. I must admit, especially with the bad weather you had here. I heard it rained most days in South Wales.
Yeah, it did. It rained everywhere.
Yeah.
We were up in Yorkshire, and the rain followed us up.
Yeah. There's nothing worse than driving on a motorway when it's busy and it's this heavy rain, is it?
And you're talking about by the time you had stopped a couple of times for a pee and a cup of coffee, it's a 6.5 hour drive,
And I'm sure that'll drain your pocket as well. I'm sure a cup of coffee is not cheap on a motorway anymore.
No, I didn't. No, it's about £3, £3.50. Ridiculous.
£3.50, is it? Yeah. Big money in coffee, really is. Big money.
Yeah. And of course, we had to come from Yorkshire down to Norfolk. So I drove from Norfolk to King's Lynn. That's where we went. And
oh yeah, good man.
Through Bradford.
Yeah.
I'm sure it's a lovely city, but it didn't look very nice from where I was.
Bradford, yeah, doesn't got a very good reputation, has it?
Well, no, I mean, I'm sure it's all right. I don't know. I wouldn't like to talk.
Well, it probably is.
But I got driven through it, and that's a nightmare.
They used to say that you got to work hard to spot a white man going through Bradford, but I don't know if that's true.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
There's a lot of brown faces.
You can't say ethnic anymore, of course. You don't say.
You've got to be careful what you say. You just don't know what to say.
Yeah. Yes, it's just a strange old world we live in. It really is.
It is. Yeah. How was your Christmas?
We're back.
Oh, there he is. Where you been?
Where's Anne then? She's gone.
We're back. Well, it don't matter if Anne's gone.
She's gone to eat her chips.
Oh, for God's sake. Rich is still there, so that's good. Right. Okay. So, what I'd like to do is probably finish off the previous lecture as we were doing, and then come back to it next week. So, I didn't get Anne was actually really good with that then. And what we were doing, Goff, was that, did you actually see the lecture I put online for last week?
No. Sorry.
Okay. Right. Yeah, you should be saying sorry, because the lecture from last week was about Neolithic sites that have been rebuilt, like Stonehenge, like Newgrange, and that type of archaeology that's been altered, telling us how we should see the Neolithic world. And that's what we were looking at last week. And what came up, what transpired from that into this week was that we've just been looking at a little bit about how the past has been misinterpreted, which we'll continue doing next week at 6 o'clock. But if there's any questions about that, Bill and Richard, say them now, then I can go on to the next point.
Yeah, the Newgrange, as you say, I think it has been vandalized. It's it is so sanitized. Is that the right word to use? To make it look better than it was. And
Yes.
I think many of the guardians of our heritage, like Cadw, they do that, they alter things to make it look better. So it tends to draw in more people to spend more money on the site.
Yes.
And in doing so, they sometimes, not always, they sometimes alter things and they shouldn't, just to make it look better. And that new Grange, it looks as if it's built yesterday, doesn't it?
Unfortunately, it does look like it's been. We've got the image on the screen now. It does look like it was made yesterday,
Yeah.
and I think, Anne's greatest contribution today, and probably for a long time, is that how authentic is the past, and I love that. And actually, that statement, and what I'd like to do is I want to bring Richard in here quickly. Anything you want to say, Richard, before I move on?
No, it looks really artificial. It just doesn't look
Right.
real. I was watching, there was a program on actually about a fortnight ago.
I'm surprised there aren't any flags on top.
Yeah. And, sort of close up and everything. It just, looks like it was built yesterday.
And that's the danger of the past. And
So it reminds me of a Tudor house. And they've left the Tudor part behind it, sort of thing, but banged on a Georgian front.
Nice. Yes, I like what you're saying. So in other words, we've got the actual original site, right? But what they've done, they've chucked their own interpretation on the front. That's really good. I like that. So how authentic is the past? Thank you for that quote, Anne. Last week, thank you for that. Anything else you want to say, Richard?
No, it's fine.
Because what I will say, Richard, this what we were going to do today, which we're not going to do now because we're in the next bit of the lecture. We're going to look how this affects the line and how we interpret places like Tinkinswood, and we'll look at a couple more images of this next week. But we are going to move on now. Last week's lecture.
Oh, I'm here.
Go on quickly. Yeah, quickly, Anne, if you want to say anything, because we've got to move on.
It's all about, it's an argument about, not an argument, but it's conservation versus authenticity.
Oh, now stop it, Anne. I
Because
love it.
It's,
Conservation.
have we the right to conserve or change our archaeology? But anyway, yeah, it's fine.
No, don't undermine what you've just said. That's fantastic. I agree with you. I agree with exactly what you've just said. Yeah, I do. So we'll what it is.
I get it. I'm just saying I get it.
Good. What it is, last week's lecture Tuesday, because it was just talking to people online, and obviously that was the lecture that I wanted you to watch from last week. It brought somebody online who said, can you look at the site of Arbelo, which is in the Peak District? I never heard of Arbelo. I'm not even going to show you an image of it this week because it'll blow you away. And they said, right, we've done research at Arbelo. Why haven't you even mentioned this? And I said, well, and they said, right, can you do it this week? I didn't do it this week, but I'm doing it next week. So they'll be joining us online next week, and they'll have some input to chuck in with the lecture next week. And then the following, then we're going to look at more in connection with the reconstructions and the wrong conceptions with the Neolithic past the following week. And then we'll go on to part 2 of this week's lecture, which is actually looking at barrow diggers. And you can instantly say, barrows are Bronze Age. But no, barrows are also of all periods, and there were barrows in the Neolithic period. So this is where we're at. This is where we're flowing. So what my aim now is to get these 3 lectures flowing all together, right? They're day after. They've got Tuesday and Wednesday flowing, and it's all, and then eventually all of this will hopefully integrate by April into the Tuesday class. We'll see how that goes. So what I'm going to do is my images are working really well today, far away from the time I first used this technology in the goat shed with Goff. Goff and I were in the goat shed. Do you remember that, Goff? Yeah.
I do. How could I forget? I can smell it now.
So
Have
could I.
Carl, have you finished this lecture now?
I finished that bit of the lecture, yeah. So you want to yes, I finished
No.
that bit of the lecture, yeah.
Okay, I'll scarper then. All right then.
Well,
Okay, so you wanted to have a chat with me, did you?
right.
Well, yeah, what I want to say, Carl, I'm here now on a Wednesday, okay? But I know in the next few weeks I'm going to miss a number of these lectures. So I'll send you an appropriate check, depending
Can
on
you
how
do
many you think I'll be there, okay?
Can you do Tuesday evenings?
Tuesdays and Wednesdays I'm away. I'm not here normally, actually. I am now. I just come back from holiday, but I'm not normally here, you know, it's awkward for me. So I can make some, I can't make others. And I don't
Okay,
really know how we're going. So,
okay, that's fine. That's okay then.
so yeah, so I will see you quite often.
Okay.
I'm not sure when.
Well, we got yeah, we got to book a New
Okay.
Year meal sometime.
Ta-da then.
Ta-ra.
Okay, anyway, thanks, Bill. Thanks for that. Thanks, Bill. Right. Okay, so here we are this week. And
Ooh.
we're looking at the Barrow lectures part 1. And what I decided, I thought, right, I've got a person on the but did Bill want to say something else? All right. I've got somebody on my Tuesday class who doesn't seem to like me talking about mounds of earth. He wants a bit more excitement. And I thought, this is what the Neolithic is about. But I thought what I wanted to do is to try to look at perceptions of the Neolithic as well. So this is where I'm doing for the next few weeks anyway, and the perceptions for the prehistoric period overall, really. So the one thing that we do know within the British psyche, within the British landscape, is mounds. Next to stone circles, you've got mounds. You know, you don't get stone circles dotted everywhere in Britain.
No.
You're more likely to see mounds dotted everywhere in Britain, at least until about the 16, 17, 1800s. There were mounds everywhere in Britain. Unfortunately, there were lots of mounds in the Vale of Glamorgan and Bridgend up until 1939. Unfortunately, when they were building runways and new access roads for military bases and so on, they were usually across land that had mounds on them, and lots of those mounds were lost in the Second World War, not just in South Glamorgan, but all the way across Britain. Salisbury Plain, we're looking at Lincolnshire, we're looking at a lot of Kent, East Anglia. There were loads of mounds up until about 80 odd years ago, and loads of them were flattened and disappeared. It's a shame, because mounds themselves are not just mounds. They contain memories of so many different things. So we're saying barrows. We're looking at barrows from the Bronze Age, and we should be focusing on the Neolithic period. But this is a general thing. And barrows themselves could control the sense of history in regards to the Anglo-Saxon period, the Roman period, a little bit from the Bronze Age into the Iron Age. There are mounds that we know of, that you're aware of, in the medieval period. Mounds themselves, mounds is quite a general thing. Barrows. Well, one thing that me and Richard are aware of is the warren, the pillow mound on Friars Point, Barry Island, which is actually a medieval barrow for rabbits. So, go on quickly.
There's 2 Bronze Age barrows in Coity.
Yes, there is. And
I wonder how big they are. They're not as big as.
no,
Yeah.
they're not. But the thing is, what we do see, the word is endemic. We see endemic changes with our landscape, and changes within our landscape that usually lost our history and archaeology. Can I just chuck this in here? Can I just chuck this in here? If this was Denmark, in 1807, a law was passed in Denmark to protect their burial mounds. We weren't protecting our mounds until the 1880s, and we certainly didn't give a bugger in the Second World War. So, you know, other countries have treated history and archaeology far better than we ever have. And you could argue, all right, you know, the war effort, we're gonna defend ourselves against this and that, you know, and you're thinking, well, you know, we've got to flatten these landscapes, and the barrows are there because they're the last areas that we can put runways, you know.
Or
the Ju-
munition tracks, you know, for
Exactly.
trains. That's what happened to Bridgend.
The Germans had a different way of doing it. Their autobahn was perfectly suitable for landing planes, but that's something else. That's another thing. So among the wealth of ancient field monuments scattered across the shires of England, the most common and the best known of barrows, long or circular grass ground grown and ground heaps of earth or stones marking the burial places of prehistoric aristocracy, dominate what we see across our landscape. And what we've already said is that some of these mounds don't only date from the prehistoric period, they date from lots of other periods. And when we think about it, some of the most famous barrows in Britain are the Sutton Hoo mounds. We forget that. But some of the most famous barrows are to be found on the Stonehenge landscape, Salisbury Plain landscape. The barrows are undoubtedly everywhere, all the way from Orkney, where we look at the likes of Maes Howe, all the way into Kent, and all the way over to Wales and elsewhere. And not forgetting the Isle of Wight, because some massive activity happened on the Isle of Wight in the 17 and early 1800s, where people were digging into barrows. It was like a pastime. Oh, in fact, we've missed the image in front of us. What we're going to do, me and Richard are going to take our missuses out on a Sunday, right? They can make us dinner, Richard, whilst me and Richard dig this mound. And this is what they used to do in the early 1800s. They used to do mound diggings. It used to be like a pastime. I think there's a record of one person digging 10 mounds in a day or something. So you can imagine how many mounds were actually out there. And even the bigger mounds like Silbury Hill, you know, all these are sort of relevant. The mounds abound, as it were. In other areas, they are spread thinly, but it's due to the fact that there have been lots of other changes in different areas of the landscape. By the way, there's lots more barrows and burial chambers, as we and Anne had a discussion in Orkney than most other places, simply because Orkney isn't as occupied as everywhere else. And Orkney's military bases were placed elsewhere, on places like the island of Hoy, which is a very odd place indeed, or South Ronaldley, so that the mainland part of Orkney more or less survived, and so did its mounds. So what we think about is Wessex, the old Wiltshire area, Salisbury Plain. We think about Yorkshire, Lincolnshire Wolds, Kent, Devon, Cornwall. Elsewhere, we've got mounds. In other stretches of the country, barrows are completely absent. In one or two places, they're completely absent, simply because of the reasons I've just given you, the Second World War. And dig for Britain. Oh, God,
Yeah.
that dig for Britain thing, you know, everything went with the dig for Britain. Woodlands, barrows. Oh, that, you know, when we think of places like Stanton Drew, down in the Stanton Drews in Somerset, I think, sure it is, rather than Wiltshire. And we think about the ploughing and moving of stones. And we think that, you know, we think what we do, we blame the antiquarians for destroying these mounds in the 1800s, when in fact we've done a lot more to these mounds than they ever did. So what I do when we look at barrow digging, and we'll do this today and in a few weeks and a few weeks after that and all the rest of it, but I try to do it in a pseudo biased way. Some of it's not right, but who cares, because they did it and we got some information from it than the wanton flattening of archaeological sites in the Second World War. So you know, for many centuries, after they had been laboriously piled up, these minor monuments remain at peace, an integral part of the landscape in which they stood. The only stirrings of interest regarding their contents may have actually been in the Roman period, and we think that in Derbyshire and Somerset, and particularly the Mendips, we might have seen Roman era people digging into these mounds. And you're thinking, hang on a minute, right? We look at these things as being curios that are 5,000, 6,000 years old. But to the Romans, they were 2,000 and 3,000 years old to them. And you're thinking that when you said that how authentic is the past, you're thinking about how that authenticity, you're gonna regret saying that, Anne, how that authenticity is to be seen by other people in the past. It is how they're seeing it. When we look, for example, at Maes Howe on the island of Orkney, when we think about Maes Howe, what we do see is, Maes Howe being dug into in the Viking period, and then they put someone they loved into the chamber, and then a few generations later another Viking group moves there, loots the Viking burial of a burial that's already been looted by previous Vikings or other people, and then later on there's other shenanigans going on with it. So all of these little snippets help us understand a very interesting and diverse past. The earliest barrow diggings were inspired also by other motives. Now, oh God, well, this is such a big topic. That image itself is people digging on a Sunday, right? The wives are a bit bored of sitting at home, so they go out with a picnic with their other friends, while their blokes are digging over in the corner into a barrow, right? It's a typical gentlemanly thing to do, isn't it? It's us plebs would be the ones digging it for the gentlemen, but that's something else. But even in Norman times, for example, people use barrows for their own reasons and own purposes. For example, a little cell from St. Albans went out into the landscape and went to a place known as the Hills of the Banners in Hertfordshire. And there's sort of a little bit of a religious group. They go out and they're looking for the remains of Saint Aphilaballus. And they dig into these mounds and say, oh God, look at this, we've got a load of bones. And they basically say that's evidence that the martyr lived. So in other words, what they said, there's a mound over there, it's got to be to do with the saint, so we're going to dig it up, and then we're going to collect the bones, and we're going to get pagans, not pagans, pilgrims. We're going to get pilgrims coming along because we found the bones. So there's a political motive for digging into these mounds as well, and that is in the 1100s. And 1199, this is a rather interesting one. 1199, there's a mound near Ludlow, and what it is, this mound near Ludlow, the church wants to find some saints' bones, and somebody says, oh, those 3 Irish saints, yeah, they're buried over there. Oh, wicked! So they go looking in a mound, right? They find a load of bones, and they become reliquaries. They're part of the reliquaries, and it's just like, oh wow, this is evidence of these Irish saints, and and people then go to these bones thinking that they are the original remains of the Irish saints, and obviously these bones can be there for people to touch, so that they can see the miracles that these saints were responsible for. So in other words, Anne, right, it's using barrows as a motive for your sort of pilgrimages. And there's other reasons. It comes in. Some people think of barrows as being places of the fairies. So what we'll do, we'll flatten them into the ditches around the outside, and we'll just get rid of them, right? We're not, and things like that. So lots of motives for destroying these mounds, and the early excavators were paralleled by other barrow diggings undertaken not for spiritual but for other objects. Thus, a number of barrows in medieval times were ransacked in the search for treasures. And we're thinking, okay, is that any different from what we do with barrows today? Because what we do, we dig into barrows today, archaeologists, and we take the artifacts away from the bones of the individuals, and we just get rid of the individuals that were buried there, and we take their artifacts and we put them in museums. Is that any different from the following? Searches of barrows in the age of Henry III in 1237, who authorized the Earl of Cornwall to dig up Cornish barrows. And therefore, apparently then, those Cornish barrows would offer wealth for the king and obviously the Earl of Cornwall. And also, the Earl of Cornwall ended up digging also on the Isle of Wight some of the barrows. There is something else I would like to say. Some of these barrows that we hear them talking about in the past, their memory by them being dug up in the medieval period, or in the 1700s or whatever, their memory is enshrined by the activity. Not necessarily we're told what they found, because in those places where lots of these barrows are, the barrows would have gone anyway. So we get some sense of their existence by these other activities. It's like an echo, oggy, 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 and it just sort of keeps going. So we got a little bit of the O bit on the end or whatever. So we got something. So in other words, what we're saying, we can't always blame past generations for what they've done, because we can blame ourselves for what we've done as well. In 1324 in Devon, a certain Robert Bupel was given permission to treasure hunt at the Chapman Barrows in Chalcombe, Devon. And this was in 1324. He was given permission to dig the mounds. So you're thinking, right, okay, it's like a popular pastime digging these mounds, and it didn't stop. Do you know, one of the things that I used to get asked a lot when I used to go out giving walks and stuff, I used to get asked the following: "Oh, why don't we dig that over there? Why do we dig that? Why do we dig all these things?" Well, if we keep digging everything, that none of these experiences of learning about the experience are going to be known. Now, I'm glad I said it in that way, because I don't actually agree with digging archaeological sites anymore per se. Anne knows I've gone through that stage where I'm thinking we shouldn't be digging anymore, but I'm quite convinced now that there's so much that's in books that we can actually research and understand the past that is being ignored, that we don't need to dig everywhere. There's so much in museums that haven't been studied. Do you know what? Most of the great discoveries made today are in the vaults of museums. For example, I'll give you some examples. We look at Shenandoah Man that was excavated in northern Iraq in 1956. Well, we know that the guy later on was disabled and was nearly 50 years old, looked after by Neanderthals, and we're thinking, right, but he was in a box for many years. Tuberculosis was understood to have maybe originated in Jericho because of the bones that ended in a box that ended up in Sydney from Kathleen Kenyon's excavations in the 1970s. When they looked at those bones, they started examining them, thinking, "Oh my God, look at this! When you didn't know this." So there's lots out there that is in museums that haven't been studied. So another interesting thing, looking at these barrows again, if we sort of, we'll go on to him now, because we're at the time where we need to go on to this guy, but we're not there yet, not this guy yet, but we're into this period. We're into the 1500s. Lord Curzon, well, this isn't Lord Curzon, by the way, gained an authorization to dig for wealth in 1521 in the counties of Norfolk, Suffolk. So again, another digger, William Diggers, can't make this up, William Diggers, that's his name, of Barnham, worked on a mound in Kent on the instructions of Henry VIII. Henry VIII gave permission for a mound on an estate to be dug into by William Diggers on the instructions of Henry VIII. So kings have been interested in these mounds. In other words, what we're saying is these mounds are important. They're enshrined in our consciousness. In many ways, we can agree or disagree how we treat the past. But what we've got to know, we've got to understand that the past is relevant And as long as we put it down on paper, as long as we try and tell people what it is, then we've succeeded. Do you know one thing that one thing that I agonize over is that I've got lots of archaeological stuff that I need to publish and write up and so on. And I've just started doing it in the past few days, and that's good. So I'm owning that responsibility. So this chap, William Diggers, he dug out a large urn full of ashes and bones of the largest size. Wow! So we got a description. We've got a description of what he found, what he's finding in 1521. That's interesting. So again, he writes this description to Henry VIII, full of ashes and bones of the largest size, with brass and iron helmets and shields of unusual bigness. It's quite interesting that the guy who's digging this is called William Bigness. And that's really interesting that we've got a description of what he's found. Obviously, none of those artifacts probably survived more than a few months because they were all melted down and this and that because there were no museums. But if he hadn't done it, somebody else would have done it, and we wouldn't even have that note. So can we argue that was wrong? All right. Or can we just say it happened? Yeah. In the latter years of the 1500s, this is where this guy comes in, but this isn't about this guy. In the latter part of the 1500s, the Sutton Hoo ship Barrow was cut into. See, Barrow, Anglo-Saxon, or as we know, Swedish Viking, was dug into by Dr. John Dee. Fortunately, for posterity, the diggers lost heart when their central shaft had all but penetrated to the relic chamber. So in other words, there's a couple of points with this. They really didn't find anything, or Anne, Richard, and Gough, they didn't report what they found because it wasn't important, it wasn't relevant. So but eventually, because they didn't actually dig into the rest of the tomb, right, we actually have ended up having the treasure from the Sutton Hoo ship burial excavated by Basil Brown in 1939. So this guy is really important. This guy is called William Camden. He was a schoolmaster, and he published a book called Britannia of 1586. And this book itself, in 1586, was the first archaeological bestseller. Remember, you're talking about Gutenberg Press in the the Gutenberg Press in 14, we're going to say 1450 odd, that's not right, but it's only 120 years later this guy is creating the bestseller, a printed bestseller, telling people about history and archaeology, and the earliest popular work to mention barrows and barrow groups. So in other words, one of the first things that people think about within archaeology from 1586 is the word barrows. They're not talking about Roman bloody roads. They're not talking about stone circles, but they are. But, we're talking about barrows. They're not talking about Roman remains. They're not talking about hill forts, all that dearth of archaeological sites. They're talking about barrows. That's really interesting. And this guy, William Camden, is inevitably a pioneer of telling us about this world around us. And this was in 1586. Now, with the interest that this guy created, our William Camden, and there's our William Camden. He looks a bit like Gough, to be honest with you. William Camden inspired in 1621 commissioners to look at the ground in Dorset. Certain commissioners with the Broad Seal of England went to dig at Upwey in Dorset and some treasures that lies underground. So they're looking into barrows. After 3 days of fruitless work, during which nothing but a few bones turned up, they left to dig at Bincombe. So the treasure, a few bones. Later in the century, Sir Thomas Brown's records the finding of 40 or 50 sad sepulchre pictures. So what we're talking about he finds a load of Anglo-Saxon beakers, basically. Not beaker people, but beakers, little burial urns of Saxon date. So that's from the about the 600s AD. Found in a flat cremation cemetery in a field near his home at Old Walsingham in Norfolk. In common with the practice of the time, he regarded the urns as Roman. That's interesting, that point that Thomas Brown was digging. Obviously inspired by this earlier work, these earlier publications, this earlier sort of talk about barrows, right? Everything at one stage was Roman. That's the point. Everything was Roman. You know, that this is another interesting point. It is sort of a side point. When we think about, oh, well, there's actually a point why that was there, but we'll move a minute. You know, it's from everybody would call an Iron Age site Roman, or they would call naturally everything that's a straight line and looks like a track Roman. And barrows, everything was Roman. Everything that was found in these barrows was actually Roman. So the thing is, this is one of those things. This is one of those things from the past that starts to set in, that sort of our ill-gotten habits start all the way in the 1600s. And it's all to do with these barrows again. And it's all to do, again, with how, again, there is a reason why this is here. Barrows, these are not you know, nobody dug into a barrow like this because this inevitably never existed. This is that site at Newgrange. And when you think about it, we gloss and we think, you know, we think that all barrows are going to look like this, but they don't. Some are sort of fleeting barrows, but they certainly don't look like this.
No.
Apart from these few examples, well, they're not few examples, may I said, and early modern barrow digging, barrows were recognized and noted by certain writers, as we know. From Tudor times, Englishmen influenced by the stimulus of the Renaissance, the mid-1400s Renaissance, began to pay heed to the history of their own nation and mentioned the presence of ancient earthworks, including numerous barrows seen by them in various parts of the country. And can I use a quote that I've not used for a long time? It's a quote from the 1950s book by Leonard Cottrell. And Leonard Cottrell, the great historian, said, why do we need to go abroad to see the history and archaeology of the world when it's on our doorstep? And you know what, Anne? I read that when I was about 9 or 10, and I've never forgotten it. And it was very right. What Leonard, I think the book was In the Steps of the Eagles or something, but it was a softback book by Leonard Cottrell.
Oh yeah.
It's quite a learned book there. Oh, in the Eagles. Oh, it's there in the footsteps of the Eagles or something. Anyway, we won't go there. But the one thing as well, that yes, we do have this history and archaeology at home, and this is that definitive time that this guy Camden is saying, look what we've got. Okay, you can actually, nobody knew about Egypt in Britain back then, right? Well, they may have, but nobody really knew about Egypt. Somebody may have gone over and seen the Pope and seen the Colosseum, right? Somebody may have actually gone to Nîmes in France and seen some of the Roman remains there. Somebody may have actually gone and seen some of the aqueducts in Spain, or they may have seen some of the massive earthworks of the Iron Age in the likes of France or even to Brittany, looking at the remains at Carnac in Brittany. And you're thinking that, but at home, we've got, this is a very huge point to make. And let's not get fuddy-duddy, let's not get passionate. People talk about the loss of trees in Britain and the loss of wildlife in Britain and the loss of this and the loss of that. But one thing that people don't talk about is the loss of our identity. I would say that if I made the following statement, we have lost half of all the archaeological sites from all of our history in the past 500 years, that would be wrong. It's more like we have lost most of our history in the last century, which is quite an extreme statement. Because when you think about it, Britain. Okay, talk to me about the Industrial Revolution, please do, because I did a diploma in it, right? But Britain, inevitably, up until probably even the Second World War, was predominantly agricultural. When you ask people, oh, how much of Britain is built on, some people say, oh, 60, 70, 80%, right? It's more like 5%. 95% of Britain isn't built on, right? That's quite a figure, right? But most of that 5%, 2.5% of that has been built in the last 100 years. The places like London, Manchester, Birmingham, Liverpool, half of that is being built in the last 100 years. And that might be an underestimate. So that means that we've lost. It makes sense, doesn't it, Anne? It's not. It doesn't need somebody who can't work out maths like me. That if we built on half of the area that we built on in the past 100 years, right, which is 5%, right, then that means we've lost half of all our archaeological sites that we know about. You can work out how is that working out, but what we're talking about is we've lost so much archaeology. And the other thing as well, and then you think, how can that be true? How can it? But most of the archaeology that we've researched has been in areas that we've built on, because that's why we're building footings and we're digging stuff up. That's how we're finding it. We're surveying it. We're finding it. That's where we're interested in. We're going out into the local area, not further about. And this is the point, you see. So we in this responsible are for the loss of most of our history, not these people in the past. John Leland, which would be a name that Richard would know very, very well. Thus, John Leland, after excursions on Salisbury Plain, this was before he started to go blind in the 1530s. John Leland, by about the 1540s, the King's Chronicler, started to go blind. And he was the King's Chronicler who wrote about the antiquities of Britain, right? But he would go on excursions to Salisbury Plain and he would record the sepulchres of men of war in different places of the plain. This is interesting. John Leland, and he was the King's Chronicler, Henry VIII's chronicler. He was recording these things. He was the thing is, right, and we're gonna say it as it is. Let's just be blunt, right? William Camden in 1586. He's writing in the reign of Elizabeth I. He's a little bit after John Leland, not too loud. Well, it's the same family. It's a little bit after John Leland, right? Obviously, for some reason, Camden and Leland tells me that both Henry VIII and Queen Elizabeth I must have been interested in history and archaeology to have actually allowed these things to be put out there in the first place, printed, because John Leland in the 1540s, his is actually the work of Stukely, right? Or is it the work of Camden? No, it's not. It's the work of Camden. I researched this one. Camden is actually, this is published in his book. This is Stonehenge. This is how Stonehenge is published in his book. Camden points Stonehenge as this. So he's doing this. He's telling us that this is what Stonehenge looks like. This is his impression of Stonehenge, which is absolutely fascinating. Absolutely fascinating. So within this landscape around Stonehenge, there are these mounds, again in Camden's book. Going back to Leyland, Leyland also noted in Doddington, Gloucestershire, a pottery exceeding finely and flourished in the Roman times, digging out of the grounds in the fields. So in other words, what's happening is that people like Leland and and Camden are hearing about these things and they're writing about them. If nobody wrote about them, then we wouldn't know that these things happened. What happened to these pots, we'll never know. But the point is that there's interest in our past. And that is a point that I made earlier on. We don't have the sole right to be interested in our past. They did. They were interested in their past. Early writers suggested a military origin for the barrows they observed, concluding that they covered the remains of individuals slain in Romano-British or Saxon-Danish conflicts. Another chap whose illustration, whose mug we don't look at, but this guy would have known him. This is Stukely, by the way. A chap by the name of John Aubrey. John Aubrey, in the late 1600s, also come out with a publication known as the Monumenta Britannica, which is slightly different from the title of Britannia by Camden in 1586. The Monumenta Britannica was Aubrey's book, and Aubrey refers to them, the barrows, as the mausoleum or burying places for the great persons and rulers of the time, although elsewhere in his work, he evidently regarded them as marking the sites of battles. He may have actually been right in both cases. You know, one thing that we do think of is, and I think this was a point that Bill made earlier on, whenever we go to castles, we always think that castles were places where people got killed, or there were sieges, or castles were built because that people wanted to defend themselves. Some castles were built because people had money. That's it. You know, when you think about the kings and queens of England, they you know, when we think about Kensington, and we think about Buckingham Palace, and we're thinking about Windsor, and we're thinking about all these other places that the royal family have got as their places today. We think about sort of, well, they only need one of them. You know, they don't need all these other places, but they do, and they built them. And you're thinking, well, when we turn to barrows, we start to think, well, you know, barrows are in fact an indication of our history. They're one indication of our history, but they're part of our indication of our history. They tell us about our history and the meaning of our history. John Aubrey, again, this is Stukely in front of us. John Aubrey, where so many heroes lie buried in oblivion and show the greatness of the slaughter, by them may be presumed whereabouts the engagement began and which way the victor pursued. Now, the reason why we think that these barrows are actually markers for burials is because they contain bones. To be honest with you, Anne, they might be right in some cases. You know, I don't know. I don't know if you've ever been. I don't know if you. Did you ever go to Did you ever go to Norm's Cafe on Cowbridge, Hollybush Down?
No.
A little cafe. Well, I used to go there all the time. Norman used to own it, and he had this cafe on the Common until about 2012. I think Goff must know it. Anyway, I used to go in there all the time. And as you go, you know it, don't you? Yeah.
Yeah.
The big question is, Goff, were you a cup of tea and chips eater, or were you a cup of tea and apple pie eater?
Cup of tea and a bacon roll.
Oh, you vandal! I can't remember anyone having a bacon roll in there. Well,
What common?
Basically, your common, Anne. No, basically, as you go down the A48, you used to have the Mulligans on the left just before the turn into Cowbridge.
Yeah.
So on the right, you've got a petrol station. So you have to go left for Cowbridge, and you've got to go over the bridge, and you've got to come back around. You've got the petrol station now on your right, and then if you turn around on the left, that was Norm's Cafe. And then if you go down that road, you go to, before you get to the little village of Aberthin, as you're going down, driving hopefully at 30 miles an hour, not more than that because there's a reason. As you start to go down towards Aberthin, there's a very sharp bend in the road. And if you go around that bend in the road, there's a barrow there. Lots of us believe either it's a Bronze Age barrow or I believe it's a barrow for some of the dead from the Battle of Cowbridge.
Oh.
Anyway, that's what's in that book I'm writing. So we're talking about barrows being an integral part of the landscape, whatever they're used for, an important part of the world that our past occupies. And that's an interesting thing. The past occupies the past. You know, people say, oh, the past is in the past. They're right. Stop digging up the past, all these sort of puns and sayings, right? But you live in the past, you know, but the past is around us. It's there. So one thing that John Aubrey did conclude in his publication, Monumenta Britannica, he included some pertinent observations on the round barrows. He saw some around Stonehenge, which we'll go on to. He wrote, have circular trenches about them, and the trench is distant from the barrow. So in other words, what we're talking about, we've got a ditch and we've got a platform, we've got a barrow in the middle. Those are called disc barrows. And unfortunately, lots of what he's describing on Salisbury's plain of Stonehenge is either in a worse state than what it was 300 years ago, or they're not there anymore. So these people have made contributions. However poor you think their contributions are, they were very important contributions. He noted the form of the disc barrow, but was undecided about the significance of the central tump as to whether it covered a burial or served as a platform for the priest or general to make up some kind of, I don't know, harangue. At the beginning of the 1500s, there was another chap, just before, again, Camden, a certain Sir John Oglander of Nunwell on the Isle of Wight. Now, this is a guy digging on the Isle of Wight, okay? So on the Isle of Wight, he says, quite difficult to read this text. You may see divers buried. So you may see mounds of burials on ye tops of our island hills, the Isle of Wight, being placed on lie where men were buried. I have digged for my experience in some of ye more smallest, and have found many bones of men formerly consumed by four according to Roman custom. So in other words, what they're saying is that the Romans ate human remains, which they didn't. But the point is that's being written about as a speculation to what these mounds are about and what is in these mounds. It's all about speculation. But now we go on to this guy. This is William Stukeley, and he was a very good artist, but there's something wrong about the perspective. But that is an illustration of Stonehenge, one of the fine illustrations of Stonehenge. So if you take away the little people, again, if we think about William Stukeley, again, what drew, not a pun, what drew William Stukeley to Stonehenge was in fact the mounds. By the beginning of the 1700s, barrows were recognized as the burial places of the ancient inhabitants of Britain. So by about 1710, 1720, this chap, William Stukeley, was very much telling us about the world and drawing it and so on. William Stukeley lived between 1687 and 1765. So he was well lived. He was a doctor, he was a cleric, and the first of the great English field, not antiquarians, archaeologists, because he made plans of the archaeology. He was one of the pioneers of barrow digging for the purpose of gaining knowledge of past societies. So this guy really helped us understand what's going on out there. But there is a downside to this chap, but there's a downside to all of us. So the barrows were recognized as burial places of ancient inhabitants. However, as few had been dug into for the purposes of gleaning information on their origins and affinities, by examination of their remains and grave goods, the derivation and period of the monuments remain vague and shadowy, and their age a guess. And I've just had a warning about my power, so I've got to put my power on. So there we go. Good. Powering up. So William Stukeley was looking at the past from hearsay, looking at the past from evidence. Now he wanted to make that hearsay and evidence come together so that it could tell a story. Some light was thrown on the subject by William Stukeley. Lots of work between 1719 and 1743 conducted field work in Britain, which led to us amassing a collection of notes and sketches dealing with a large number of prehistoric antiquities, not just barrows, but Stonehenge. And look at this. I tell you what, right, Anne, that's a pretty good bloody sketch, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
But that actually looks that actually looks like Tinkin St. Lyther's burial chamber.
St.
But
Lyther's,
it's Kit's Coit in
Yeah.
Cornwall. We've actually been there, and
yeah.
we've been to Kit's Coit.
Ah.
So anyway, not these. Anyway, I've just let's go back to those images.
So this
Kit's Coit.
lecture's about antiquarians, isn't it? Antiquarian
Yes.
archaeologists, yeah.
And how those antiquarian archaeologists tell us about the Neolithic period in their way,
Yeah,
really.
yeah.
So we are still doing the Neolithic period. It's just that we're doing a lot of Bronze Age as well. It's just trying to. What I'm trying to say is that the first people who really were interested in the Neolithic period were actually these antiquarians and these archaeologists like William Stukeley. So Stukeley is regarded as the first great English field archaeologist and antiquarian pioneer. His acute observation, that's pretty good, and recording contribution much to the growing interest in archaeological field studies, although he went a bit awry. In later life, he had a wayward imagination in regards to druids. So what he would do, he would write about it. Well, we can blame him and also Iolo Morganwg a little bit later for people being involved as bards and becoming druids. And I do believe that our present king is actually a bard, isn't he, or a druid? And also a great prime minister at the beginning of the 1900s also become a head bard. In other words, Winston Churchill. So it's all due to an archaeologist giving us this folklore, leading to the Druid cult, which bedeviled English archaeology for the next century and more. He even turned his field notes into religious tracts to support his weird fantasies. So as he was using the archaeology to back up his druids. So Stukeley sketched many barrows, however, but back to the archaeological fact and sense, you know, he can stick as many druids on this illustration as he wants. I've done it again. Oh God, I keep pressing the wrong button. Sorry, Goff is going to have an epileptic fit in a minute if I keep going on like this.
Well, don't say that.
So there we go. So the one thing that we think about is that even though he goes off on a bit of a tangent, what he's doing he is still recording us and telling us about the past. Stukeley sketched many barrows and barrow groups, attempting some classification of them by form, insisting however, you know, that they had a king's barrow or an archdruid barrow and priestess barrows. And lots of the naming of the landscape that he offered us, like king's barrow, queen's barrow, are wordings that he gave the landscape. He thought a series of bronze axes, which he described, were used by druids to hook mistletoe from sacred groves. However, he still recorded things. The wild imaginings besetting him in later life have clouded the value of his early work, but his early work is massively important because without him, lots of what we do see within the archaeological landscape in regards to the barrows, the Neolithic and the Bronze Age landscape would be lost forever. And later antiquaries have regarded him as a mixture of minute original observations with crude and ill-founded conjecture and hypothesis. So basically, by going into looking at Druids and so on, he spoiled what he was trying to tell us, which is a bit of a shame, because illustrations like this are key. And I've done it again. Oh God! What I'm doing, I'm trying to pinch the screen, right? So I'm trying to sort of make them go in, but it's not working. So this is why I keep having to do this all the time.
You're trying to create a line.
I have to create a line. Oh, hang on! If I press the screen like that, oh, I'm doing it wrong. I got to press the screen rather than squeezing it, right? So this is a lot better. You can see the value of his work, can't you? And this would be. There would have been a mound on top of this originally. There would have been a long barrow on top of this in the Neolithic period. So this is a site that I think, you went on one of the, we've been to Cornwall 3 times. So I think you went on one. And I think we may have visited this one.
Yeah.
I think, did you see Kitty Coit with me?
Yes.
Yeah, we saw Kitty Coit. Well, Kitty Coit is slightly different than this today. It's a little bit more collapsed and a little bit, so in other words, what he was seeing then was a lot better than what we're seeing now. So his work is of value. Stukely's keen perception enabled him to make sound observations on the barrows, as you're seeing. This is in Cornwall. And then if we go back to the likes of Stonehenge, including the realization that many enjoyed, what we're seeing is that it's thanks to him that there's this interest in this history and archaeology. Talking about Stonehenge, which we will go into in a little bit of detail in a few moments. We'll get on to that. He noted that the barrows at Stonehenge, in a place called Hackpen Hill, and others are set with great art, not on the very highest point of the hills, but upon so much of the declivity or edge as they make appearances, as above to those in the valley. So they're basically everywhere. He's saying there's barrows everywhere, at Stonehenge in particular. On Oakley Down, which we don't have a photograph of, but we will be looking at these images now. Oh, we can think there. This is a nice one. This is an Oakley Down. This is actually, I do believe, up north. This shows an illustration of the landscape that William Stukely is actually seeing at the at this location. But on Oakley Down in Dorset, he showed the Acklin Dyke. This isn't that one. Roman road to post-date the barrow group there as it cut through 2 disc barrows. Now, basically, what he's saying is that the road existed after the barrows. Now, that is proper archaeology. So in other words, the barrows couldn't have been after the road because the road goes through them. So that means that the road is newer than the barrows. That is reading the landscape. So Stukely is truly somebody who's able to read the landscape. He's able to say that this road in Dorset, Oakley Down, the Acklin Dyke in Dorset, the line or direction of the Roman road necessarily carried it over part of one of these tumuli, and some of the materials of the road are dug out of it. This has 2 little tumps in the center. And this made me think, when we did this on Tuesday, a point and a remark was made on Tuesday. Some people in the past respected history and archaeology, because if you read that and you say, well, why didn't they just demolish? Why didn't they just, they basically built over part of one of the tumuli, but it's still there. And it's almost as if you've got these 2 tumuli there, but they weren't completely demolished. The Romans actually kept bits of the tumuli there. If they didn't respect them, they would have flattened them. It was just that the road was going through there, like modern works. And this is a key point. I believe, and I'm going to say it, that the Romans seemingly respected history and archaeology, their landscape, the heritage of the landscape, more than we do today. There's many instances. For example, when we think of when we think of Maiden Castle with the great banks and ditches at Maiden Castle, that's still there. The Romans didn't build a fort on it; they built a temple on it. But they kept all the banks and ditches at Maiden Castle. Stonehenge, that existed in the Roman period. They didn't demolish that to make roads. You've got Avebury. You know, there's Roman sites around Avebury, but they didn't loot Avebury for all the stone to build the Roman sites. Silbury Hill, they built a settlement around Silbury Hill, but they didn't demolish it. The Romans did respect the past around them. It's almost as if they're occupying the landscape within the past. And you can clearly see that within the Roman world. And in many ways, I don't think, yeah, we've got 3 people watching this today, which is good. Whether you guys or these 3 people online might or might not like this statement, but in many ways, the Normans weren't as destructive as we think they were. The Normans actually occupied sites and places that already existed and used the existing trappings of those defences within their works. For example, Porchester, the Normans built the Roman fort, used the Roman fort of Porchester, used the existing walls, added to the walls in Porchester, and actually built the church inside. Cardiff Castle, the Normans actually utilised the Roman defences and the walls at Cardiff Castle to instate the Norman castle at Cardiff by about the 1100s. So you know, and when we look at the Marlborough Mound, that was reused in the Norman period. So people in the past seemingly do respect their past around them, however odd that sounds. Mount, you know, I love this sort of sense. We will go into this image and this image. I just want us to examine that, right? That is the pastime. The costumes roughly are about 1830 there. And you've got a typical wheelbarrow of that genre. That's a typical wheelbarrow on the left there. And that's probably something that's been done on a weekend. The missus is going
illustration.
Pardon?
That's a nice illustration.
It's a beautiful illustration.
Yeah.
I think the original is actually in colour.
I was just wondering, would you be able to see, you know, from Old Sarum, the fort,
God, yeah.
the fort, would
Yeah.
you be able to see that from Stonehenge? Because I was quite interested in that mound, all those mounds around Stonehenge with a castle on top. And I wondered whether they just, you know, put it there as a castle that was in the area. You know, he just did it as an illustration.
I actually believe, because the way the curve of the land is at Salisbury Plain with Stonehenge, so Stonehenge is, from my reckoning, it's a bit of a raised, but it's in a bold area. I don't think you'd be able to see it from Old Sarum.
No.
I'm not exactly sure, but you might be able to get one-way traffic. But you are right, Old Sarum isn't really far away, is it?
No.
Not at all. I've been to Old Sarum. I think I've been there twice. I know I went there with my other grandparents in about 1983. I remember buying my first book on archaeology in a bookshop in Salisbury, and a fascinating place. It's an underestimated place, to be honest with you. It's an Iron Age site. It's a Roman location. There's a Roman villa there. It's a Norman site, and then you've got the town, and love it.
Yeah.
Love it. We love it. We
It
do love
goes
that.
with this talk, really, doesn't it? You know, it's really got all the elements in it.
Yeah, no, it
All
does.
the
It does.
elements, yeah.
It does. It's almost as if it's utilizing the landscape and sort of breathing and pulsating. Yeah, I can see that. Yeah, I can see that. Anyway, what we've next got are these, right? This is known as what it is, you've got those, hang on, you've got those three, you've got those there. What, so hang on, I've got to try and get, can you go over on the right hand side of the screen and you can see two circles, and you can see one circle with two mounds in it. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's the one we're going to talk about, right? So this is part of the Stonehenge Cursus monument, which is very, very near Stonehenge indeed, right? And these are some of the barrows. So you've got the barrow group there, right? So that's what we've got there. So the ones on the right, so this is what we're going to talk about. This will take us to the end of the lecture today. Stukely set out to oblige the curious in the antiquities of Britain. Nice way of putting it. And in the 1720s, with financial assistance and prompting from Lord Pembroke, carried out perhaps the first objective barrow diggings on record. He carefully noted the structure of a twin bell barrow in the Cursus group north of Stonehenge. There it is. And actually, there it is. Guys, I would love to sort of, but we're going to lose it. So it's you've got the two mounds there, haven't you? You've got the big mound and you've got the little mound. So the two, you've got three sets of you've got 5 sets of mounds there, but one of the mounds is 2 mounds. So it's the ones at the top of the screen, that one. So here we go. Let's get excited about this. The manner of composition of this barrow was good earth. We're gonna see this. The manner of the composition of this barrow was good earth, the twin barrow, quite through, covering it quite over under the turf. Hence, it appears that the method of making these barrows was to dig up the turf for a great space round till the barrow was brought to its intended bulk. Then the chalk dug out of the environing ditch, they powdered it all over. About 3 feet below the surface was a layer of flints, humoring the convexity of the barrow. This being about 1 foot thick, rested on a layer of soft mold, another foot, in which was enclosed an urn full of bones. Do you want me to explain what that means? So basically, you've got a little hole in the ground with some bones in. Directly on top of that, you've got some soft earth. Okay, and then what you then find is that you've got a surface of flints, and on top of that you've got turf. So what you're doing, you're cutting the turf from around the landscape, right, and you're building a mound from the turf, and then finally, and you've got the chalk, finally you're digging a ditch around the outside and you're building a chalk mound around that. That is the sequence for the building of this mound, the building of this barrow. And this is not much different from how a barrow would be made in the Neolithic period as in the Bronze Age, which these barrows exactly come from.
They're smaller though, aren't they?
Say that again, Anne?
They're smaller. The Bronze Age.
Yeah, exactly. And you've learned something over the years. The barrows through the ages get smaller. So the Neolithic period, they've got the long barrows, which are much bigger than these, and they're longer, actually, oblong, rather than circular. Then in the Bronze Age, they get smaller, and in the Iron Age, they get smaller again. And in the Roman period, they're duty, right? Some are bigger in the Roman period, but yeah, you are right there. Thanks for that. You are right. It was reasonable to believe that this was the sepulchre of a man and his wife. So you've got 2 mounds there. So if we go back to the other image, there on the right there, you've got the mound with the 2 in. So it was reasonable to believe that this was the sepulchre of a man and his wife, and that the lesser barrow the lesser mound in that circle was the female. And so it proved when they dug, because when they dug into the smaller mound of those two, the two circles within that circle there, right, at least a daughter, it appears to have been a girl of about 14 years old, or their bulk and great quantity of female adornments mixed with the bones, all which we gathered. Beads of all sorts, many and long pieces notched between so as to resemble a string of beads. And these were generally of a blue color, evidently faience. Faience is like a clay overfired with a bit of sort of ochre color in. That's a faience bead. There were many of amber or all shapes and sizes. One of these was covered with a thin film of pure gold. But you only see the gold mentioned in the end. Stukely is interested in the process. He's interested in everything there. So in other words, we've got a male burial, which is the bigger of those two mounds there. And actually, if you go, you can see that the one of the two mounds there that are together, you can see that the one in front is slightly larger than the other one. So that's an interesting point there. In the companion western mound, I think if we go there, companion western mound, turn that around. Number 8. Right, okay. It's not reading well. In the companion western mound, an intrusive skeleton was disinterred. Stukely felt that this to be the father of the... Oh, God, yeah. Do you know what, Anne? I'm confusing myself. I was right in the bloody first place. Do you know what? And I overcomplicated that. Right, so, okay, yeah, those two mounds there. So the eastern one is the woman, and the western one is the man. So it's the bigger one. An intrusive skeleton was disinterred. Stukely felt this to be the father of the female in the eastern barrow. The primary interment in this barrow was never reached. It was discovered about 80 years later by William Cullington. Stukely appended a drawing of a section of the eastern barrow, possibly the first ever recorded by an English prehistorian. So in other words, he made a plan of it, which I haven't managed to get today, but, you know, can't get everything right. Finally, in his writings, so if we sort of, this is not one of Stukely's age. I think this is actually one of William Cunnington's age, 80 years later. So we're talking about the 1800s. In his writings, Stukely makes mention of further barrow excavations he pursued around Stonehenge and Avebury. In a great and old-fashioned barrow west from Stonehenge, he wrote, I found bits of red and blue marble chippings of the stones of the temple, so that probably the interred was one of the builders, proving the contemporaneous nature of the barrows and the blue phase of the henge, or a period when the blue stones were being reused. Actually, when I've read this before, and when I read this on Tuesday, that sentence before we come into the end of this presentation today is massive, because William Stukely is saying that the blue stones, here we go, proving the contemporary nature of the barrow and the blue stones phase of the henge, or a period when the blue stones were being reused. In other words, what we're saying is that he believed, even in the 1700s, the Stonehenge is not one build in a moment. Stones are being moved around, little fragments. It's at different stages, different phases of Stonehenge. And this is what we're seeing in his writings, even in the 1700s. Very advanced in his archaeological thinking. Of this barrows, he noted that there is commonly an urn under the small tub of earth in the middle. At Windmill Hill, he opened a small barrow. Windmill Hill, if anyone's ever knows where Windmill Hill is, it's immediately north of Avebury. Or is it immediately north of Woodhenge? I always get the two mixed up. I think it's Avebury. He opened a small barrow, very old, flat and round, and found an entire urn turned upside down, an inverted urn. Basically, what you do, it's little sort of a little bit bigger than a mug, and you put the cremated remains in it. You put a bit of cloth on it, tie it down, and put it inverted in a hole in the ground. The bones very rotten because they had been cremated, he said. From other notes mentioned in further barrows he opened, one gains the impression that Stukely was for a time very active among the Wiltshire barrows on Salisbury Plain. In fact, he hired labourers to dig for him at certain times. He mentioned one Richard Haynes, an old man of Amesbury, who I employed to dig for me in the barrows. This is Stukely saying this. Stukely heard that Haynes had reputedly found Roman coins in the Stonehenge barrows and was selling them at inflated prices. He himself doubted that the coins had come from the reputed source. Feeling Haynes to be guilty of sharp practice, as he wrote, I suspect he pretended to find them at Stonehenge only for the sake of the reward. So in other words, it's using the past for your own devices, where he was excavating for Stukely. Although Stukely took care to note how the body was positioned in his examinings of various skeletons in the mound, he often failed to reveal how the true details of the remains, thus failing to appreciate the significance of primary, secondary, and intrusive interments. Nevertheless, as the first purposeful digger for knowledge, Stukely is an important figure. He serves to mark. There he goes. He serves to mark the transition between untested theory and questioning investigation. Here rests the lecture today on barrows. More to come. And are there any questions, folks?
Oh, sorry, I asked mine in the middle. I asked mine in the middle.
Well, that's fine. You've done your questions. Good. Okay, right. All right then. So what we're going to do now is find out if there's anything that Richard wants to say. Richard's gone to sleep. Is he
Ricky,
asleep? Richard! Oh, he's gone to sleep.
ask off.
Richard!
I think it's very, very interesting, you know, William Stukely. And of course, he was a man of leisure.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. That's true.
So, yeah.
A bit like Richard, really. He's a man of leisure. He's gone to sleep. Right,
Richard,
God.
Richard.
That's very interesting. There's a lot to take in there. You covered a lot of ground in that hour and a half. Lot to take in. So but very good. Yeah, very interesting. I didn't realise so much work had gone on centuries before. You know, it's amazing. Yeah. Thank you.
No, it's a pleasure. Thank you as well. It's the one thing about all this is that it's surprising that the past isn't just our domain; it's other people's domain as well. And this is there he is, Richard.
Morning.
Richard, is there anything you want to say, darling, before we finish? Before you get on with more of your sleeping? I hadn't seen somebody jump so much in my life.
Oh, you should have been kind and given him some privacy.
Oh, well, you know, he needed to wake himself up. Richard, anything you want to say? Because we can't hear you.
We've been talking about William Stukely and his mounds. No, his barrows. And various things. Have you heard of him?
I've heard of him, yeah.
Oh, that's good. That's good. No, I mean, you know, it is very important for people to realise how much work was done, you know, from the sort of 16th century. You know,
16, yeah, well, 1500, 1600s exactly, yeah.
And you know, we must have had a wonderful landscape of, you know, there must have been lots of interesting, you know, points.
A wonderful landscape of history, exactly.
Yeah. So
Very good, very good. Thank you, Carl. Excellent.
It's my absolute pleasure. So okay, so if we don't have any other questions off Richard, and we don't have any other questions off Goff, and we don't have any questions off Anne, we will no doubt be seeing you next Wednesday,
Right.
or Tuesday if you want to join us on Tuesday. And yeah, yeah, it'd be good to see you next week.
is it the
Go on.
same class on a Tuesday as a
It's the
Wednesday?
same class. It's the same class on a Tuesday. They're a bit more nuts.
There's more people though.
Yeah, there's more people. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I'll go wherever you want. I'll come on. I'll, join on Wednesday.
Oh, you know,
It's me.
me and Goff love you now, so you can join us on a Wednesday.
Well, I fantasize over it, right?
But I don't
Well, I fantasize over Anne as well with Goff in the beds, but that's something else.
know.
Okay.
Oh dear.
See you later.
I haven't had a drink all Christmas. Or
Yeah,
a
well, you
chocolate.
should have one now. All
Or
right, then, Goff.
anything.
Goff, thanks for your continued support. I will see you next week.
Okay. Goodbye, everybody.
Bye then.
Goodbye, Goff.
Bye.
Bye.
See you next
And
week.
Richard, I will see you next week as well.
Yeah, bye.
I'll be in touch.
Bye.
Take care, Richard.
And you all.
And take care, Anne. Oh, Anne's gone. Okay, thank you very much for watching that. That was a very long one today. As usual on a Wednesday. Now it's moved. And don't forget to like and subscribe. Press the join button. We could always do with some shekels. Anyway, thank you very, very much for your continued support. And thank you very much. We're just going to look in the chat box. Nothing in the chat box on 1, 2, 3.